Hey there, my name is Dave Howard, and this is a first of a series of videos that I'm going to be doing, kind of documenting my process of going through an Achilles tendon surgical repair. Just as a time shot, this is at 1 week out from my actual surgery. I'm just going to do a little overview to get an idea of where I'm at relative to the original injury and so on. A little background just to kind of fill in what led up to the injury, and then I'm going to kind of just briefly summarize kind of where I'm at physically and all the things that I kind of did along the way leading up to this point. For those that are interested, I will hopefully be doing a weekly update regarding how the surgery is going, the rehab, and also talk about some of the research that has gone into Achilles repair and the rehab process. And so on. So I think this video will be helpful for those that are either looking at getting the surgery done or have concerns or questions regarding the rehab process. And also it's just a little bit of insight regarding where I am in my triathlon and multi-sport development and the future prospects of racing, etc. So just briefly, I'm going to talk a little bit about my background. For those that know me, this has been a long process to get to where I'm at now and regarding the surgery. Just as a quick summary as to kind of what kind of led to this injury. So I started triathlon approximately 10 years ago. I just kind of on a whim just decided, hey, I remember watching this thing on TV about triathlon, and I want to take a shot at it. So I went out and did my first triathlon at the Blue Lake Triathlon. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was in Parker, Arizona. And it was roughly an Olympic distance, slightly longer, I think, on the bike. And anyway, I had a miserable time. Someday I'll do some race summary, kind of a progression through my triathlon progression and so forth. Needless to say, I was on my back and last out of the water and second to last finishing the race. But yet a week later, I volunteered at Ironman Arizona and did signed up for my first full distance Ironman, which I then did Ironman Arizona. In 2014, I believe it was. Was it 14? 2000. Yes. Sorry, it's been a minute. And completed that, and that's kind of started my triathlon journey. Anyway, I've done 7 full distance Ironman distance races since then. The last couple years, I haven't done any racing. COVID, and then cancellation of Ironman California, followed by some medical issues with my wife. Basically, it's left me with only a couple races in the last couple of years. My fitness has been all over the place. Related to the injury, I'm also nearing 33 years of being in the Army, in the reserves. However, I've been mobilized in multiple times throughout that period of time. One of those mobilizations, I was in Fort Bliss, Texas. At that time, I was doing a lot of rucking, and that year I did a what's called the Bataan Death March Marathon, which is a marathon distance in the sand and rocks as a military heavy, which meaning that I would carry a full rucksack and combat boots, etc. And then also I did air assault, which involves a lot of ruck marching in order to prep for it because it has a final exam of a 12-mile ruck march. Anyway, during that process, I was having irritation of my Achilles, and I also decided that year I would do 2 Ironman distance races. So I was doing a lot of biking and other conditioning work during that time. My running volume actually wasn't that high because I started having heel pain. That heel pain I attributed to a stress fracture, and I've had stress fractures in my feet before, midfoot, toes, etc. And I basically did the do as I say, not as I do, and basically switched to Hoka's softer running shoe, thinking that that would help. And the pain was persistent even after taking blocks of time off, and made more aggravated by wearing combat boots, which I had to do on a daily basis, as well as all the rucking and so forth I was doing. Needless to say, at the end of that period, I had seen physical therapy. I had been doing the classic Achilles rehab, such as the heel drops and etc. I did take some blocks of time off after, especially after the second Ironman, which was again Ironman Arizona. I did a springtime the Vineman race, mainly as just a return to the process. I wasn't really trying to get any PRs on Vineman, but I did do quite well as far as I thought. In Ironman Arizona, except for the run. It was very miserable due to the lack of conditioning because of taking time off for the run, and then also the pain that was involved. After I returned, I started doing my own rehab. Later, I was finally able to get an MRI, which showed that I had some tears of my Achilles and inflammation at the insertion. And this part's important. Because it is an insertional Achilles tendinosis that was developing, which is different than a mid-substance Achilles tear. Oh, as an additional side, I'm a physician assistant, and I have been doing that for 20-some years, specializing in neurosurgery and combat medicine. I also was a medic and ICU nurse before that. So I do have a good understanding of medicine and pathology. So back to the difference. So when people talk about having an Achilles tear or Achilles rupture, a tear is a tear in the Achilles tendon that connects your calf muscles to your heel. And then there's a rupture, which means it is torn through, and that's a devastating injury. Mine was never that bad. I actually didn't have much Achilles pain. However, again, these are things you see in hindsight. About a year before, when I was back in Arizona, before this started, I had a pretty significant calf injury that I attributed to doing heavy leg in the gym without proper warm-up, and then doing some sprint work, and I rehabbed that out, and it seemed to be fine. Never had Achilles pain, but the pain was in the mid-calf. During the time back, when I first got back from the active duty period in Texas, I started trying to run again, and I was starting to see an orthopedic surgeon. At that time, I had been training for a half Ironman distance race. I had done the HITS series half in Palm Springs, but this was the Ironman first year where they were doing it in what they call Indian Wells, which is basically Palm Springs. And I had been training for that, again, with very hit and miss kind of running. I would basically run maybe 2 or 3 times a week, trying to avoid hills, trying to avoid sprint work, things like that. It didn't hurt that bad when I was running, but then afterwards I would be almost non-weight bearing for a couple days. However, the orthopedic surgeon wanted me to get an MRI, but done immediately after stressing it. So I got the MRI 2 days after I had done the half Ironman. The run was an absolute sufferfest. Again, both probably conditioning aspect, but also the pain in my heel area of the foot. Anyway, I saw him. He talked about surgery. And the prolonged layoff off from that. At that time, I did not opt for surgery. This was kind of what's funny is I keep thinking that, oh, I'll just rehab it and I don't have time because I have another Ironman race coming up, etc. Obviously, this would have been an awesome thing to do and get the surgery done maybe during COVID when I hadn't had any races coming up. But anyway, so I started again, trying again, going at having another race season that would build up without much pain, but then slowly it would come back on again. And then I actually did get PRP injections. They did them both in the about 2 inches above the insertion, where I had the original injury and some disorganized healing. And that itself is an interesting process. Just in brief, they draw blood, they spin it down, they take the platelet-rich plasma and inject it back into you. They do this without anesthetic, so it doesn't distort the landmarks. So that part's kind of fun. A large bore needle stuck into your Achilles with no anesthetic is a good time. Anyway, I did not notice any significant improvement despite having that done. Later, over the course of the next couple of years, I did go and become part of a VA's experimental. It was they had a name for it. I don't recall off my head, but it's basically a placental matrix, as they called it, injection. I don't know if I got the placebo or not, but I was put into a boot for an extended period of time, and then slow self-directed rehab over the course of a couple of months. I don't know if it was just the time off from running, being in a boot, etc., but it did seem to get somewhat better, but it was hard to say what was aggravating it. The criteria for a good result through the VA is basically that you can do normal activities, not run, definitely not Ironman, those kind of things. Regardless, time went on. I did see a different physical therapist a couple times. We did try different things over the course of the preceding couple of years. And I'd have some good months, some bad months. Basically, it has continued to progress, however. And over the last 6 months to a year, as I tried to train it up for Ironman California 2022, that period of time I was building up and developing, again, pretty significant pain. I was doing no hill work, no speed work. I was doing just basic stuff, especially a lot of treadmill. I've cut the heels out of all the shoes that I was using. I have special inserts, you name it. I tried it. Some of the things that did seem to help with things like, again, cutting the heel portion out of the shoe so there's no direct rubbing on the insertion. Also wearing night splints, which is basically what's called a Strasbourg sock, which puts your toe back towards your head, kind of in a 90-degree position. That seemed to help a lot with any morning stiffness and pain. That's primarily used for plantar fasciitis, but again, the fascia of the body is all interconnected. So the plantar fascia on the bottom of the foot is connected to the Achilles in a sort of a tension band line. Anyway, those things all mitigated, but did not resolve the problem. Follow-on imaging doesn't show a massive Haglund deformity, which is a lump of bone that grows through the over time. I do have a significant one, enough to wears out the back of all my shoes, and it puts a lot of pressure. One of the worst pains is driving. Actually, just driving, just manipulating the gas pedal. I have to usually kick off the shoe, and that way I can kind of rest my foot on the top of the shoe. And if there's any more than 10-15 minutes of driving. Walking now, I have a slight limp. What's interesting is it doesn't hurt any less to limp. It's just that the body naturally goes into sort of a limp when I get up from the chair, and then I have to consciously kind of go, stop limping, because it doesn't improve the pain. So at this point, I have already talked to an orthopedic surgeon. I would have liked to have done the surgery a while ago. However, I just got back from yet another military mission. I was gone for a month or so, And it involved, of course, being in my boots all day in the field, and that did get to the point where I was limping almost continuously while I was out. So that kind of told me that yes, I finally have to need to do something. And here's part of the problem. I think this is important when you're considering this kind of surgery. So there are several different approaches. Some of the research I've looked into, there is minimally invasive or minimal approaches, which we basically go in and only cut away the portion that is the most diseased, and they keep the tendon attached to the bone. There's no removal of the bone itself. It's just to kind of basically cut away any diseased tendon and reattach it. However, I've also been hearing both anecdotally and then some basic research that I've evaluated that it frequently, if you are a high, let's just say if you're an athlete or somebody that's very active, very often it leads to later having to have the full surgery down the road. So at this point, I've decided to go ahead and do the full surgery. There are a couple of approaches. There's the midline approach, which is directly behind the Achilles. They cut somewhere around a 6-inch incision. They remove the Achilles from the bone. They grind away any or cut off any of the Haglund deformity lump. They remove the bursa, which is a padding kind of sac there that so often is inflamed during this injury. And then they reattach the Achilles, possibly cutting away any significantly diseased. And then they use a combination of staples. Some would use a type of screw that goes in. And there's also a lattice of stitching that is used to hold it to the bone. There's a lateral approach which does the whole same surgery procedure, but the incision is on the side of the Achilles. The risks and benefits between the two surgeries, the midline seems to be a, quote, easier approach. However, it does have a slightly higher risk of wound problems, whereas the lateral approach has less wound problems. The surgery I'm going to have, per the description from the surgeon, is that he's going to use a lateral approach for this. The normal standard of recovery is that they put you in a cast with your toe completely dorsiflect in a pretty extreme toe down position to take all the tension and stress off the Achilles tendon. It's usually held in that position in a cast for 2 weeks. At that time, they put you in a boot with a significant high heel wedge that keeps you in that same toe down position. And approximately every week, they would take about 1 centimeter or approximately a 1/2 inch off each week until eventually it's flat. You're still in the boot. At that point, you are then able to do some basic level of some rehab exercises and so forth, never extending your foot up like this relative to your shin bone. It's still kept 90 and all the movement is done in a downward position. You're able to do some rocking and so forth to develop some of the small muscles in the lower leg that have atrophied over the period of the approximately 2 months that you've been in the boot. Now, my surgeon is going to probably be very aggressive with me in the sense of being very conservative. What do I mean by that? He knows that the history of runners and other athletes, they want to get back to running and being very aggressive. He did mention the possibility of keeping me in a cast for a month. I am a little reticent to do that because of the significant amount of atrophy, and also, and this is something that is in the literature, early onset of weight bearing does improve outcome at 6 months, but not 12 months. What does that mean? Now, what that means is that if you can start initiating weight bearing, that does not mean running. What that means is after the cast is off, you're in a boot initially with no weight bearing. Then you could use a knee roller, crutches, whatever. Then after a week or so, then they allow like a 25% weight bearing. What does that mean? That means basically you're just touching your toe ever slightly while you're using your crutches to get around. And then you progress to 50%, 75%, and eventually full weight bearing in a supported position, such as wearing the boot. So this is the current recommended process. In that process, you can do other things like conditioning, upper body and so forth. At some point when you start the boot, going to start using things like flutter kicks and knee extensions and other kind of activities to try to work on muscular strength. I'm going to do an episode on this, but at this point, I'll keep this shorter. There is what's called blood flow restriction, and it's used in rehab, both knees, Achilles, and so forth. And basically, it's a blood pressure type cuff that is placed on the legs so that you can do very low intensity, low strain exercise, but it produces a physiologic environment similar to doing high load exercise. So, for example, the knee extensions and so forth, you can do it with just the weight of the boot. However, it would be the equivalent of using a resistance machine and so forth. So it puts it at a low risk to injury or re-injury or aggravation by doing that. Again, that's something that I talk to the physio about, and I'll talk to them, and we'll get a feedback on all that process once we start following this along in the weekly process. Most athletes have been following many, and most of them are running at 6 months. Some are not able to do hill work without discomfort, or they're not able to do maximal high intensity like sprinting. Most are able to do low intensity and even some tempo work at 6 months. Usually at 3 months is when they're first starting to do some basic jogging. Again, no high intensity, no hills, things like this. And it's done at a very slow, progressive return. This is one of those things that I have to remind myself. You will develop your conditioning at a higher, faster rate than you will develop your tendon strength. You will also develop your muscular strength at a significantly higher rate than you will develop your tendon strength. The things that you do to develop your muscle strength will generally improve your tendon strength. However, tendon has very poor blood supply, and so some of the things that you do in rehab that I will be doing will help hopefully improve blood supply. We'll also be looking, and I will talk later about some of the nutritional strategies, things that I've done a review of research on, such as adding, whether it's bone marrow extract or zinc or some of these other things. Again, I'll talk about them in length, what I feel is going to be appropriate for me to try. Anyway, so all these things will come up in the future episodes. Like I said, this is a week out from the surgery. This week I'll have a meeting, a pre-op meeting. Again, with the surgeon, we'll talk about things, and I'll probably do a follow-on discussion right before surgery, and then of course immediately after, and then hopefully on a weekly basis, barring any other challenges. I'll also start discussing my plans. Obviously, the Ironman California Part 3, which would have been in October, is probably out, which means I'll probably just see about doing a deferral to October of 2024. So this will be a 4th attempt at Ironman California. I don't know if that's destiny or just maybe I should pick a different race. I've been hoping to do it because I did the original Vineman, that wasn't an Ironman race, as my first Ironman race. And then I did the Vineman twice, Ironman California Vineman. Because of the fires and so forth, it was switched to Sacramento. And I've been hoping to do that. I've prepped for it. I've gotten all the way up to a month out and not been able to do it last year. And then, of course, the year before, they canceled it 15 minutes before the start. So this is where I am physically right now. Right now, I'm about 10 to 15 pounds over my weight for racing. I haven't done hardly any training. I've done 2 bike rides, I think, in the last 3 months. And so I've gained a lot of fat and lost some fitness in the process. So by the time the surgery is done and so forth, I will be tracking my weight and so forth. I'm actually trying to use this as an opportunity to work on general strength. So a lot of like lightweight band work, core strength, isometrics, all the things I can do in a boot, non-weight bearing, those kind of things, to hopefully give me a good prep. And then with 1 year out plus to get to California, yes, I'll be older. I won't have the advantage of being a brand new in my age category, but I do think I can build a base, which is generally a challenge for me because I tend to focus training in the last 3 months before, and it's easy for me to get the HIIT type workouts in, but not the long steady state. So I end up getting maybe 4 or 5 bikes over 100 miles, but I do know that if I can build a big base over the course of the next 3 or 4 months, mostly through indoor training, and I know that I will probably be able to launch myself into Ironman California 2024 with a good leg up, despite basically falling down to 0 on my fitness, if you believe Training Peaks. So again, not to overrun this first episode, but I do hope you join me for this journey. This is the first major surgery, orthopedic type thing that I've gone through. I've had labral tears in both shoulders. I've had rotator tears. As they say, there's a difference between being old and army old. Lots of back injuries. I've had knee things, multiple fractures. But this is the first time I've really had to have any surgical repair done. And I'm optimistic that I can get back into running and hopefully running pain-free sooner than later. Hopefully within that 6-month window that I'm shooting for. In a perfect world, it'd be about 3 months, but I am 50. How old am I? I'm 55, and so it can take longer to heal. I've learned that the hard way through the last few years. We're trying to recover from intense workouts, but this is going to be new, different, and extra special, I think, experience for me. So I hope you will enjoy this. I think it's going to be educational for both of us as we go through this. And again, I will also be paralleling this with discussion more specifically towards my Ironman and triathlon / multisport progression. I know I started some of this before in the past, but I think I'll also hopefully get some upgraded camera system. We'll start adding some things to make it a little more entertaining. And then I'll be also describing the training philosophy and process that I go through to go from basically bed rest to Kona qualifying, hopefully, knock on wood, in the next coming year. So hit the like and subscribe and all that kind of good stuff. And hope to see you on the other end of this and hope catch up along the way. And any comments, I will try to read them that you may add. And I'll talk to you later.